Hello, good morning. How's everyone? Ready for some humanity and AI speech? Fantastic. It's a very big pleasure to be here with you. You know that AI is currently being developed and advanced very, very quickly, but there are very few that are exercising conscious contemplations. We are here most of the time feeling like we are on the defense, that AI is on the offense, and we're here trying to scramble our response towards it. Christopher Nolan lately with Oppenheimer has shown us that when technology is not advanced coupled with wisdom, it will be detrimental for humanity. Under no circumstance I'm trying to compare atomic fission with AI, but we all know that the desire to advance and compete with our competitors can create a moral dilemma with needing to be silent and exercising ethical and human spirit-related conversations. We all know that technology does not advance itself. It's a group of humans in different parts of the world collectively are advancing it. So we either go through, I will do it for the benefit of myself at all cost, or we choose to have the collective benefits so that the whole population benefits out of what I'm doing. So during today, with these three very distinguished thinkers, makers, doers, creatives, we will be exploring a world, how we can think differently, how we can embrace novel technologies without stopping them, how can we exercise conscious contemplations so that AI can benefit all of us. I would like to start by introducing all our panelists. To my right, we have Kami Naghdi. He's a highly regarded expert in film and television, known for handling significant transactions and right deals globally, with diverse experience spanning media finance to production. He is the head of film for Clinton's law firm, and one of his recent works that we all know, Tom Hanks' A Man Called Otto. To my very right, we have Dekai. He's a distinguished professor in computer science with pioneering contributions to machine transition and machine learning, and has been recognized globally for his innovative cross-disciplinary work, bridging cultures, music, and languages, holding prestigious positions and awards throughout his academic and professional journey. To highlight only one out of his many achievements, Google named Dekai as one of the 8 inaugural members of the AI Ethics Council, ATEAC, Advanced Technology External Advisory Council. And to my left, we have beautiful Anna. She is the head of ethics and partnership at Respeecher, with prior experience in AI synthetic media and counter-disinformation tools, and has an extensive 11-year background in security, defense policies, and resilience building, having worked with major institutions and advising Ukrainian firms on resilience strategies. A recent highlight that her company has recently made is the cloning the voice of Mark Hamill to make a younger voice for Luke Skywalker in Mandalorian. And I am Pinar Demirdag. I'm the co-founder of Cuebric that Gary previously showcased to you. I'm the generative AI instructor of LinkedIn, and I'm a loud advocate of reminding humans, all of us, of our higher principles so we can use AI for our collective benefit. All right, I have only one slide to show you, and I would like it to play as the intention of today. Can we please put there you go. I would like to read this to you. He's Comte de Saint-Germain. He's one of my favorite humans that ever lived. And he blessed us with this sentence, in my opinion, creates a beautiful umbrella for AI ethics. Remember, blessed children of man, that the purpose of real science should be to increase the happiness, to free the race from every external condition that would not be beneficial for the elation of man, for the pristine greatness of his original cosmic destiny. With that, I would like to start with my first question. I will ask it to all the panelists, and I would like to start with Kami. A lot has changed in the past 2 years. With the advent of AI, a tidal wave of new opportunities and new tools has come. There are those who embrace it, and there are those who resist it. Some are welcoming, others are afraid. I would like my first question to be about demystifying these fears. what are the changes that we will be facing, and what are the possible dangers, and what will be the opportunities. I'd like your point of view to be the first.
Thanks, Pinar, and hello, everyone. As Pinar has pointed out, I think there's a huge amount of change on its way. And as humans, we have a response to change instinctively, which is to fear it. And I think that that should be avoided. A response born just out of fear is an emotional one, not a rational one. Are all the changes necessarily going to be good is a different question. And can we govern and shape these changes as they evolve? And I think the answer to that is the point of a discussion like this and the point of governance in industries is to find a way to shape those changes that are beneficial, to adopt those changes that work not just for some, but for some form of greater benefit. So I think that needs to be the underpinning philosophy. And certainly if we're coming up with things like an ethics manifesto, that is the aim. Does that mean that every change that's going to come is comfortable or is obviously good as opposed to bad? And I think that gets into a much more complex area. And as sophisticated people, we need to understand that these are going to be shades of grey. There is going to be less work for some of the people in the industry as things stand today. But is that on its own necessarily a problem? And I think one answer to that is not necessarily. Is AI a tool that can be embraced for positive benefits to the industry, to permit interesting and decent things to happen in the industry? I would say yes. And I will go later on this panel into a bit more detail on some of these issues. But as this is the warm-up question, I think that's a sufficient answer for now.
Beautiful. Thank you. Dekai, I would love to have your point of view to this umbrella general question of how can you help us as a creative technologist demystify our fears around AI?
So I think one of the things, as somebody who's literally spent almost my whole life, like 30, 40 years developing this technology, one of the things that has been striking me the most about a lot of the fears that I'm hearing about, I think that we have actually to recognize our own human prejudices. You hear today a lot about the bias in AIs, but also recognize that that's coming from bias in ourselves, in humans, because we are the training data. And so part of that here is what are our biases towards AI? What are the framings that we're using to talk about AI? Are they coming from entertaining Hollywood narratives? Are they coming from actual rational analysis? Are they coming from instinctive gut fears? There's a question about, at the same time that we are holding on to what it means to be human, our own humanity, how much of that is based on our own personal ego, and how much of that is based on what future society actually looks like? One example, people are thinking very much today in this, especially in this world of cinema, but also in many other spheres, ranging from my work as a musician to my work as a professor to my work as a coder and a writer, that we're going to be replaced by AIs. I have to ask you this. Let me give you an example. So one of my musical instruments is percussion. If some of you are probably old enough to remember in the 1980s when drum machines came onto the scene. And in the US, drummers actually negotiated a deal, the unions, that there must always be a live human drummer on stage. And so for years, there were these concerts where you had a live drummer on stage. You had 2 or 3 synth pop musicians standing in front of their keyboards and singing, and then you had a live drummer in the back of the stage who was doing one of 2 things. Either was looking like that he was energetically doing something, but basically he was tapping the hi-hats, while the drum machines went, or he was just holding space. Now, fast forward to today, what has happened? Have drum machines disappeared? No, they haven't. Has music disappeared? No. Have drummers and percussionists disappeared? No. What has happened is that new integrations have been found. So, on the one hand, flourishing of electronic music, and on the other hand, an integration, percussionists and drummers playing together with that, and acoustic, unplugged versions of the same songs that are beautiful. Why do we appreciate that? Do we appreciate that because the human percussionists and drummers are more perfect than the drum machines? Do we appreciate it because the drum machines have become more humanized, which they have? No, we appreciate that because ultimately watching a performance is about communication. It's about the interaction. If you go to a club and you see some great musicians playing, do you say, oh, I'm not enjoying that because that musician is not as good as this other musician? Not at all. There's only one best musician for any particular instrument in the whole world. That doesn't mean all of the others are no use anymore. This is about person-to-person, human-to-human connection. And that's something, I think, in this AI era that is extremely important for us to recognize. Sure, we may have digital avatars and so forth, but ultimately, we are still going to appreciate when it's a real human that is a communication with our real humans. And I think in the rush to some of the framings about AIs, that's something that we have to understand. That yes, there's these technologies, but we're going to find ways for humans to communicate with other humans, even with that technology in the loop.
Thank you. This was such a beautiful answer. And Anna, what a different point of view you will be offering to us as a security and defense policies expert.
Thank you. I think we are today at a new stage of when we look at the future of technology and we have a collective ability to shape its future. But how do we do it? And it's interesting frameworks that I use from security and defense background before I transitioned to technologies. It's about evaluating impact. What impact does create this particular technology today? We are seeing the revolution of AI on society, on perception of technology, that is meaning trust to the technology, on individual, where is my data, how it's being used, how I can protect myself, and of course on that middle intermediary on business, because we have to admit that capabilities of AI are mainly owned by private entities. And it's interesting that if we compare how we look at technology today, it's fairly different how we've been discussing it 10 years ago. So even in 2016, when we were discussing how social media platforms have gained that amount of power over our attention and our consciousness, right, driving our ideas, driving our information to us or out of us. By that time, we were not prepared actually to discuss and break the wall between policymakers and private sector and civil society. That has changed immensely for the past 10 years. And this change is actually, we see here in our discussions that AI and ethics of AI is discussed on many platforms today. And that awareness of society has grown to that level that sensitivity and the perception of technology and the trust becomes a backbone how we move forward. But then there is another question. What's the framework, how we build this governance around it? Can we expect that it's policymakers and government responsible for our safety? Is it us who are responsible to be more, to demand more accountability using our own tools as citizens? Or it's business or private entities that have to do that? And there is no single answer to this question right now. But let's see how it happened in AI sphere, in generative AI, in that area that I've spent already for the past 4 years. So the regulation has not been existing, and it's only in draft stages. We've been executing and developing and emerging technologies in generative AI has been appearing massively since 2016, and we existed in self-regulatory framework. What we've done by that time is that we created a lot of initiatives and cooperation platforms between companies developing those policy tools, like discussing whether synthetic media or generative AI should be used and should not, how we can guard it. While policymakers were, of course, like sending messages, look, we want you to start thinking about that. It's also that society was sending messages. Look, we've seen how technology has been used and how privately owned technology has been affecting elections, security, information space. And the answer, what I've seen quite a positive, that we've achieved some not only policy buzzwords, but also technical approaches how to, for example, digitally sign some synthetic media. And that has been developed in a private sector initiatives that we share. And this shared collaborative approach is something that I would like to bring up for you to think when also like writing this manifesto. What you're expecting, what your expectation is, that's first, and second, how you feel you can communicate back to companies and your governments what your fears are and what are the opportunities for you are. Because this is essential how we build resilience. And resilience, I will just like, finalize my thoughts about that. There is simple framework of resilience building. It's built from 4 gaps. It's capacity gap, communication gap, vision gap, and mission gap. The mission of business and government and society sometimes might collapse because business wants to be profitable, civil society wants to feel that it can execute its civil rights, government wants to feel in control and also provide the well-being for a society. Communication, how do we build this partnership between policymakers when AI EU regulation is framed, when US regulation on AI is framed, when UK regulation on AI is framed, where this communication between companies and policymakers is happening, how often does it happen? Values. And this is actually, I would like us to bring here today, what are our values actually in AI? Because in European Union we would say how AI regulation is saying that it's all civil rights, human rights, and protection of human rights. If we look at US or UK, it's competitiveness, right? To be like leading AI innovation states in the world. And the last one, it's of course capacity. We have to understand that technology, capacity of technology, will always stay mostly in private sector. So the question is, how do we harness that ethics? How do we require that ethics being shaped inside of private sector?
Thank you. I would like to start tackling the elephant in the room, and I would like to start talking about the strikes. Since you are the most experienced of all of our panelists, I will, from what I know, is that the strikes are about 2 separate things. One, writers and actors not being compensated fairly, and the other one, concerns around AI. What would be your advice to studios and to creatives in the film industry?
Easy question to answer. I think in order to really answer that question properly, we need to look at the philosophy and the context. Where are we in the technological evolution? What are the economics of the industry that are creating the strife that we're seeing in the Writers Guild and Actors Guild at the moment? Where did the tension come from? And for that, I'm going to reach for my favorite quote from Barbie. Life, it's all change. And as we touched on earlier, that makes us uncomfortable. Every time there is rapid technological evolution, we go to a movie like Frankenstein in our minds, and we imagine a monster emerging from the unknown. And a lot of films have been made about exactly that. Is that the correct philosophy? And I think, as I touched on earlier, I want to move away from a concept of fear. And let's look at what's really happening in this pivotal moment. We have had 10 years of the golden age of television with an unprecedented economic boom. The streamers have spent billions of dollars in content production and acquisition. So what happens there is you get price inflation in the industry. Directors, writers, producers have all been paid more and more and more to hire a soundstage, to hire facilities. All of those costs have gone up astronomically, and these companies do have shareholders they have to answer to. They have to look for technological solutions to some of their problems. And so what happens? With the advent of AI, they are looking at greater speed in content production. A writer used to take months to turn in a script. They had human problems. They had pushy agents and aggressive attorneys. No longer with AI. They get rapid turnarounds with an emoji smile. You have less cost in the long run. As the technology evolves, the cost is going to come down and it's going to be more affordable. You have less hassle because you don't have collective bargaining agreements with a guild. You don't have picket lines and strikes and placards and embarrassment. And you literally, with actors, with AI, CGI'd actors, have less risk. You don't have accidents on set. You don't have chaperones. You don't have bullying and harassment. And so the human risk and the human cost that comes out of that is all technologically lowered. And those are realities we need to look at. And not all of them are something to be worried about or upset about. But what's the flip side? Because there are humans currently doing some of these jobs, and we need to understand what may happen. I think there is a real risk that there is less work for some actors and for some writers. That, I think, is a fact of the future. But there is retraining into different skill bases. It may be that actors shift towards things like motion capture and more CGI-related LCD backdrops, what we used to call green screen, but is now advanced from that. And what about writers? Maybe the showrunner of a television writer's room is retrained into the inputs into AI-generated screenplays, and then working out how to carry on with revisions and polishes from there. But what else could go wrong? When we look at the Industrial Revolution, we saw huge shifts of agrarian populations into factories, and then the factory jobs were lost to computerized systems. If we track a similar thing through the film industry, what the danger we have is a loss of artisanal skills, model making, compositing, costume and jewelry, set design, camera and lighting. Some of these old arts may become just that, old arts, and we'll read about them in the making of Blade Runner, and that's where they'll be lost. We don't want that. Audiences don't want that. So where do we get to? Do we get to a world where fantasy and sci-fi in a grand scale is assisted by AI, where audiences that watch that won't mind and might even enjoy the fact that there's an AI generation of content, and an indie drama world which is all about screenplays written by real writers, all about acting by real actors. And I suspect that's one direction we may be heading.
That's a very good answer. If I may add to your words about, for example, I'm no writer, and I work with extremely talented writers. If you put me in front of ChatGPT and task me to write you a script, it will be terrible, horrible. Yeah. Nobody will want to watch it. Why? Because I don't understand the intricacies of writing. But if you give it to my talented writer friends, ChatGPT, they will have 6-7 ways to ideate, compare their notes. If they have a writer's block, they can use it to inspire themselves. But I believe that one of the biggest challenges that we will be facing as humanity is to be too comfortable in the normalization of mediocrity. If an executive of a studio tasks me and my mom and my brother to write a script, it will be horrible. Yeah. Forever. We will be in our echo chambers writing about what ChatGPT gives us and be like, pay me my money. It will be really the demise, the end of human creativity. That's why we should, all studio executives and all creatives, we have to constantly make sure that, is this tool a good match with my core skills? my core spark of humanity. With that, Dekai, I was thinking of asking you something else, but I'm so inspired by what you said earlier that I would like to ask something that I haven't thought about before. If let's say that you task me with the task of coming up with an idea. Pinar, I pay you X amount, and then you will come up with an idea. The way I come up with ideas, simplifying AI to make a crude simplification, is that I have a data set, my memories, I have an algorithm, which is my unique creativity, and then I have an output, which is the idea. So my data set will be what my grandmother said in her dying bed, what my neighbor said before I left home, and what the TV said about X politician. I will mingle them up together, I'm making crude simplifications, and I will run it through my unique Pinar algorithm of creativity, and I will give you an idea, which is a total sum of everything in existence that I ever experienced. And if we were to look at a generative AI algorithm like Stable Diffusion, it is trained on 7 trillion images. 7 trillion. I can't even count until 100 before needing to drink a water. I don't even know what 7 trillion equates to. What I want to ask you as a creative technologist and a philosopher, do things become a problem when we can quantify them? Do things become a problem because like you can make a comparison of my unique mind, your unique mind, with a 7 trillion image data set. It's the total sum of humanity. My mind is like total sum of everything that I ever experienced. But my question is, do things become a problem when we can quantify them?
It's a very interesting question. I mean, first of all, whether we can quantify something or not, it still exists. Being able to quantify it is just taking a step back and looking at the picture. So everything is ultimately quantifiable if we, I mean, our own memories are also quantifiable if we go to brain science and psychology. So I don't think that's really the issue here. I think all of us, when we create, as you said, we're building on the shoulders of giants, all of us, right? None of us are coming up with these ideas purely from scratch. And we're influenced by maybe not directly looking at 7 trillion images or 7 trillion novels or 7 trillion web pages. I mean, what we're influenced by, though, are things that have been produced, created by other people who have been in turn influenced by other things, in turn influenced by other things. And that is a number that grows combinatorially, grows exponentially. So even if I haven't read directly 7 trillion items, I certainly am being influenced by 7 trillion things that came from the past through all the intermediary creators that have been influenced. And I think this is something that is extremely important for us to recognize in the AI era. There's been a lot of discussion about, we were talking about the strikes and so forth. And I think it's very important to understand that there are extremely valid concerns about, in the AI era, how are we going to take care of rewarding creators and recognizing creators. And I think that, this is a separate conversation that I've a lot to say about. But ultimately, the top line is we are going to have to completely re-architect the old regime of intellectual property, which has been only around for a few hundred years out of Western European civilization, and is not the way we've always done things. And it is time for yet another rethinking at the same level that we did when we invented this metaphor of intellectual property in the first place. It's time to do that again. The disruption of AI is greater than almost anything we've seen in history. Mm-hmm. If this doesn't spur yet another creative revolution in how we architect the rewarding and the recognition of human creators, nothing will. I mean, obviously it's time to do that, and I think that's another elephant that we're sweeping under the rug, trying to hold on to an obsolete past. But that's a separate conversation. What we're looking at now is the idea that creation goes on. And it's always a co-creation. It's always been a co-creation, and in many ways, up until now, we have not adequately rewarded or recognized our human ancestors of our creations. We only acknowledge a very tiny fraction of that. Mm-hmm. And and today, now, as we go forward into that, it is really important for us to look at the narrative that we're putting around this. We need to acknowledge the co-creation. We need to actually get away a little bit from, like, I mean, if I may say, right, this is a room full of people who are in cinema, who are producing narratives, who are, and like any of you who actually do write scripts, who actually do the screenwriting, you know, there's always like, okay, we need not just we need a protagonist, we need the antagonist, and there needs to be a conflict, and there needs to be, you know, fears, and then we have to overcome that. Well, you know, the most recent TEDx talk that I've given, 3 days before ChatGPT was launched, was literally titled, "The biggest fear with AI is fear itself." And we all know, in this room especially, that fear is the strongest human emotion. It's like 3 times stronger than anything. And even in the politicians in Washington, D.C. and Brussels, people know if we don't drum up fear, we can't get any legislation passed. And this is actually, again, in the AI era, a very dangerous dynamic, because in the pursuit of producing entertaining, gripping, money-making film, we often amplify fear. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing if you're telling a story, but if we're applying that same mindset to AI, and if we're going in and we're producing an exaggerated sense of fear about where we're going, then we're doing a disservice to humanity. And I would implore you, as somebody who, I mean, I'm also, like, there's working on a film, and there's a documentary accompanying my book, which will shortly be out. And these are discussions that we're having. And what I implore you in this community is take responsibility, not only for producing an entertaining, gripping film, at the same time that we are lecturing people about humans and AI and society, understand the impact that so much fear-mongering does as we're trying to make this difficult transition to the AI era. Find narratives that go beyond the simplistic, because the simplistic narratives can already be generated by ChatGPT. It's just borrowing off of all this Hollywood stuff that's already been out there, all the sci-fi that's already been out there, all the dystopia that's already been out there. No, lift your imagination above that, rise above that. Use much deeper intellect about where our civilization is going, much deeper imagination, and look also to hope and find narratives there, because that's the only way we're going to get there. Cinema is self-fulfilling prophecy.
Thank you. This was such a good answer. Dekai, if I were to add one more sentence to your beautiful self-expression, is that if we were to continue being driven by fear, we will perpetuate AI's biggest, not a fear, the biggest bias in AI, which is humanity's inferiority complex. As long as we are driven by fear, we will keep on placing ourselves inferior and place AI, our neighbor, celebrities, superior. With that, just when we thought that we were tackling hard subjects, I would like to go to the guts of AI and ethics, and I would like to give that responsibility to you. I have a question that has to do with one of the major concerns, which has to do with manipulation of human behavior in social media and in media by using advanced AI techniques to subtly manipulate us by using psychological tricks to make us think in specific ways. I know that you have a lot of experience in that, but also we are moving into a world where we may not be able to trust what we see or what we hear. Will we be able to discern an evidence if it's manufactured in AI? How will we know that if it's manufactured with AI or not in the court of law? Or political campaigns using deepfake technology to influence elections? How do you advise us to navigate this new paradigm shift?
Yeah. I would actually, answering this question, would pick up the fear part. Because that's exactly about that when the notion and terminology of deepfake appeared around like 4 years ago that got everywhere on the media. And in the beginning, how deepfake got that negative use was unconsensual porn. And actually women are the most affected by deepfakes. With the time when synthetic media was already created and reached that level to recreate someone's voice, to recreate someone's face, lip sync, to recreate an image of someone. And there are many companies, emerging companies, has appeared providing those services on the market. So I would like to clear out one thing, the distinction about deepfake, synthetic media, and generative AI, just for all of us to know what we are dealing with. It's intent. What is intent of creating particular digital content? Deepfake, the intent is to manipulate, is to make you believe in something that has not really happened. Synthetic media is a creative approach that is used in the entertainment industry. Like, for example, in Respeecher, we are creating a voice of hyper-real voice of any person, and then another voice actor or person drives that voice. That is used in movies, in Hollywood movies, but also small creators can use it. And then there is a generative AI that already includes not only image, video, audio, but language models. And in combination, of course, all these technologies can be used to manipulate or dismiss or mislead your, manipulate your attention, mislead you, make you believe in something. And of course, how we are dealing that is actually technological approaches in building that transparency for you as a users, for us as a users, to understand what we are facing, what we are interacting with. And unfortunately, it's quite boring answer. It's watermarking and metadata. Metadata, it's about digital signature of this particular file that you can see by which technology it was created or where it came from. That's why I told in my introduction why industry standards are important for this collaborative approach to safeguard the technology. But it's also like understanding how information space is built. It's built from technical tools that create digital content. It's dissemination platforms that are social media platforms, other platforms where you consume the content. And we as users, consumers of the content. And at every stage, there are particular technical tools that we can apply that will help us to bring more information about this particular digital content, where it came from, who is the author, was it half manipulated or fully manipulated. And I would be honest, because detection today does not exist. Unified universal detection of deepfakes does not yet exist. How we deal with that is, again, a collaborative approach between companies. We have our deepfake rapid task forces, where we help fact-checkers and journalists to take those cases when they fear that it's potentially malicious or information operation, digital content. They send to our international group from different companies that we gather together, and we have 24 hours to provide our feedback. We train separate neural networks to actually check, to find artifacts, and audio files are the most difficult to spot whether they're deepfake or not in comparison to the image, because image deepfake has not achieved that level of hyper-realistic quality as sound is. And by sound, you can be misled even on a phone when you can believe that actually quality can be disrupted by actually connection. So it's way easier to use this technology. So again, how we deal with that? It's about providing those tools of transparency and building that trust in technology. We cannot let our fear just to block the technology. It will never work. It will go in dark webs. We have to admit that. And like spending so much time in security defense, you have to you have to face the fear, and then you're so comfortable tackling that. And there are really technical tools that we are developing together that will help us. So I'm positive here.
Thank you. Me too. Let's go back to law. given the advancements of AI and their quick implementations in the filmmaking process, do you think there needs to be changes in the court of law? And if so, what do you think they should be?
Okay. I am going to answer that, but I'm going to pick up on a couple of the other things that have been said because, again, they give it context. And having said people shouldn't react out of fear, I'm going to say I'm fearful that I'm going to sound like the pro-robot advocate up here. I'm not, I promise you. But I want to lay out the different sides of this. And I think it's important we don't treat this as AI versus the human soul. That's a weird concept.
Yeah.
In a secular society, I think we shouldn't be assuming that anything that is generated technologically is a problem because it lacks soul. And as a legal concept, we don't really have the soul woven into law. Many hundreds of years ago, we moved on to at least the concept of a heart, an anatomically proven, life-giving organ that we can all find and point at. So if a script is written by an AI, does it necessarily lack heart? And I totally take on board the mediocrity concern. I think that's valid because we haven't yet seen, to any scientific extent, how well the writing algorithms work, and they haven't been assessed in terms of quality. And that needs to happen still. But the assumption is mediocrity, and I think that may be a valid fear until it's proven wrong. But what if there's a script that's written by an AI that really doesn't lack heart? What if it moves us all? How do we contend with that emotionally, and where does that sit in our legal response to it? And let's go into that. Every time there are vast technological changes, the press seize upon that to say, ooh, new frontier, total lawlessness, and some mavericks will attempt to carve out a business niche before they're stopped by the people that own the rights. But in my view, copyright law as it stands today has been coming up with some quite sensible responses to AI. Both in the US and the UK, a screenplay, an original screenplay generated just by AI, is not entitled to copyright protection. So if a company spends millions of dollars producing that film and distributing it, they have no monopoly over it. People can copy it if it's a success. So it won't happen. In contrast to that, an AI adapting a book or an AI adapting the Marvel comic universe, comic book characters that were written by humans that we know, that screenplay will contain copyrighted elements and be entitled to intellectual property protection. So let's not simply assume that the law written over hundreds of years is defunct, nor should we be so complacent to assume that we can sit on our laurels, that there is nothing else to do. We need to make sure that diversity laws about the content that's generated by AI are apt, that the people involved in those films and that the characters we see are representative of society. We need to ensure that the way that AIs learn, the data harvesting, the scraping, that is not simply stealing people's intellectual property. On the other hand, there is a balance. There is a benefit potentially to society of AIs, and certainly in other quarters outside film, they may need to be permitted to learn because it will benefit society.
Thank you. Thank you. This was a very good answer. Thank you. We have 1-2 more minutes before we take the questions from the audience, so please prepare your questions. We will have 15 minutes with you. But before that, I would like to ask you, Dekai, a question. What do you think, and I will ask you to answer in 1 minute, what do you think the underlying fear when we fear creatively that AI will replace us? And how can we replace it with courage?
Courage is, I think, what we really need in this age. And one of the biggest types of courage we need to handle the new era is the courage to ask ourselves the hard questions. There are a lot of hard questions that we keep trying to avoid. We have grown up. I'll give you an example that's related to both of these. So one is about deep fakes, for example. One is about property that intellectual property that we believe is being stolen. And then the other fear that you hear a lot about these days is, at CogX as well, is about surveillance. And I think that there is, in all of this, a tension between two things that we claim we want that are logically at odds with each other. And one is transparency, and the other is surveillance. Mm-hmm. So we want privacy, but at the same time, we want watermarking for deep fakes. We want to be able to track where creative things came from. Well, if you watermark everything so that we can trace it back to the origins, there goes the privacy. And what do you do about the author who has read the output of ChatGPT or some large language model, read it, and then gone and written it down from memory, 99% or 95% the same thing that was produced by ChatGPT? Is that now considered human produced, or is that considered AI produced? Is it 95%? Is it 80%? Is it 75%? And how do you measure anyway? Do you count words? What about languages like Turkish, where you can't even count words the same way that we count in English? There are a lot of subtleties in this that we keep sweeping under the rug. And it does require a rethinking when you look at the technology, and it goes back to understanding this notion of co-creation, and requires within that frame understanding how are we going to trade off being able to track where everything came from, whether it's for security or for compensation and credit, versus privacy and not wanting surveillance. These two things, we are going to have to make a trade-off in a lot of real-world pragmatic cases, and those are the kinds of conversations that we, especially in media, should be engendering, rather than pretending we can have our cake and eat it too all the time.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point of view.
If I can.
Thank you. With that, please.
Yes, if I can add.
If we can keep it to 1 to 2 minutes.
Really short, because as I work with voice cloning, and we work with actors and with Hollywood actors, different actors, and it's about this striking a balance, and also striking a balance for a business model and a company, how we decided to approach it. So from the beginning, we established a best practice of requiring permission, and voice owner is always owner of AI voice model. And the person is deceased, we also require permission from a family, a stakeholder, or copyright owner. So striking this balance, it's about how we consider technology being developed 15 years ago, move fast and break things. Right now, today is move fast and don't break things, and think 2 steps ahead, because AI is built on highly private. It's highly private for us. It uses our biometric data, it uses our data, it represents our likeness. That's why this balance is, of course, will be a big question for us, but there are solutions for that.
Thank you for adding that. Do we have any questions from the audience? Sir?
Hello? Hello. So, one of the dynamics that's somewhat a concern for the artists is if you have a look at the AI algorithm, then you have the software team, the time, money, and resources to make the algorithm that is the AI, and then you look at the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of images and videos that are used as training data. There was a huge amount of time and resources to make that data in the first place. So you're now making and generating new content, and if we have a look at the man hours, the resources that went into the AI algorithm and the training data, by a ratio, by a huge margin, the work went into the training data. And what we've seen how technology companies like Facebook, Meta, Google behave. You're beholden to the shareholders. You want to make as much money from your product as possible. Are you going to fairly compensate by that ratio of what was brought to the table, the artists who had generated that original training data. Because you talked about mediocrity. If we're not generating any more training data because we're just using AI data, then you're going to have some sort of stagnation in that training data, aren't you? That's my question to you.
I have an answer to this, if I may. So I think one of the things that we're hearing a lot about in the media, and a lot of fellow musicians are also doing this, but also in film, is saying, look, we want our art to be excluded from the training data because you didn't have rights to look at our art, right? Now, what I want you to do is take a step back and think about whether this is the right approach. Think about what all of us as artists actually do. Do we prevent ourselves from looking at art that has been produced by other people? Is that how we do copyright law or intellectual property? No. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, right? Do I walk by someplace that's playing MC Hammer or whatever, Dua Lipa, and say, no, I can't hear that because I haven't paid for it? It's kind of ridiculous. What do we do? What we say is, if what I create is too similar to something that was produced by another creator, then I've crossed a line, and that's not allowed, and there are penalties for doing that. And this is, so we're not regulating what are you exposed to. We're regulating what can you create without compensating and crediting. And I think this is the approach that we're going to have to look at with AIs. Why? Because, again, take a step back and look at the broader picture of humanity and society. We're looking at already today what was last year unimaginable for most people in terms of the power of AI and the influence of AI upon society. Now imagine a hypothetical world where we've excluded this part of pop culture and that part of pop culture and this part of pop culture and so forth from AI's exposure. What are we building? We're building massively influential AIs that have lost touch with a great deal of our own culture. AIs are incredibly influential even today, and that's only going to increase. Do we want AIs to be interacting, influencing, and impacting our societies who are out of touch with our own culture? I work a lot with people in AI alignment, and that sounds like the worst recipe for disaster ever.
Would you like to answer from the point of view of a lawyer?
Absolutely. If we look at Tom Petty, the singer-songwriter, he, I believe, is one of the most oft-copied musicians in modern pop history. And yet he has sued 0 times. People have settled and paid him royalties from their songs when other people have pointed out that a hook, a riff, a line was taken from his song. But Petty's own view was, these are points of reference. We all learn, we all listen, we start from somewhere. And I think we need to be careful not to axiomatically expect compensation for being in the learning pool. And how do you divide the learning pool? How do you pay for the learning pool? An undergrad at UCLA who is reading screenplays by David Mamet, who is reading screenplays by Arthur Miller, who is watching films by Stanley Kubrick, he may pay for a copy of a script, or he may watch the films. She may have a subscription to Disney. She may have a subscription to Netflix and watch huge amounts of content on there. So they're paying their $7.99 a month for a year, $10.99 a month for a year. Is that the compensation that's being sought? And what do we pay for learning? Learning has typically been a defense to copyright infringement, where things are used as a learning tool. So I think it's very easy to say compensation needs to take place. It's a whole different ballgame allocating what that compensation is, dividing it between the millions of hours of the content input. And the cost of generating that content is not the appropriate measure. The cost of viewing it as a single consumer might be, and that cost is very different.
Very good answers. Sir, here?
So with the traditional model with TV series, you have a head writer and you have a team of junior writers, and they submit their ideas and the head writer reviews them, polishes the script until they have a final draft. How does the panel think that AI, generative AI, is going to affect the industry? If those junior writers are no longer needed, there's obviously going to be savings to the production, but the head writers eventually will get older and retire. And you were talking about learning. There needs to be new lifeblood injected into the industry, new up-and-coming writers who are given the opportunity to learn and improve their craft. Is there a danger that AI is going to replace them and make them redundant? The same applies also to law. If you've got new lawyers and AI can do the work of those junior lawyers. So my question is, how do you feel AI is going to affect particularly writers in the entertainment industry?
Shall I do a quick answer? And then...
Yes. Do you want to answer?
It's a very valid question. And both actors and writers who are honing that art, the junior ones, the unknown ones, those who are the stars of the future, that is where one of the risks lies here. And that is why AI cannot simply wholesale replace. If anything, it may exist in parallel, in my view, but it cannot replace. And let's use an easy example. If we fly from London to New York, we get on the plane, we all know that most of that flight is done by autopilot. Would you get on that plane if someone said to you, no one in the cockpit today? You wouldn't. And I realize that screenplays are not a matter of life or death. And I realize that the acting profession is not necessarily a matter of life or death. But the point is the analogy works. We want someone there who sort of knows their craft, and they need to hone it, and there needs to be people doing that in the future. And that is one of the problems we need to duly confront and make sure we adequately deal with.
Now, just one thing to that. It's a great question. And I think what we need to understand is that in that same process, the junior writers that used to have to slave away for years until they got promoted now suddenly also have the capability of becoming head writers, because now they can employ AIs to do the work of junior writers. And we've already seen this dynamic very much, for example, in music production, where the automation, a lot of AI has made its way into music production right now. And so now you have many more music producers, and the richness of the stuff that's out there is very different. And so there is a trade-off here in the democratization of the production tools that actually enables talent to not have to do so much of the slave labor, but actually to grow faster in their own creativity.
Anna?
Yeah, I will add here as well that sometimes we put the bias on automation of processes, because we always in centuries progress from automation, and it never means, it not always means replacement of jobs, but actually providing more opportunity for creative work while using those assistive tools. And I will provide an example of those, how we worked and how I worked with those misperception of using voice cloning for actors. It's not about replacing an actor in studio, but it's actually allowing actor to take more projects when another voice actor can drive his or her voice. And for example, voiceover in an audiobook or podcast, whatever. It's also from one side scaling voice, but from another side, when voice actors are always attached to the identity, right? I can speak only with my voice, and it has particularity of being a female voice. But with technology, they can scale their projects, and they can be converted into male voices of different age groups, kids' voices, female voices. It's also about scaling and providing more opportunities. So sometimes I think we are cornered by those fears, and it's time already to decouple, I think, like those opportunities, and how we manage, of course, compensation, likeness protection, and those threats that are more on the security side, of course.
Thank you. I would love to keep on going the whole day, but we have come to the end of our panel.
Pinar, may I ask one thing of the audience?
Oh, please.
I haven't asked. The documentary that we are in pre-production for about AI, ethics, and society based on the book, If any of you here are talented and interested, we are looking for team members to join this effort. I think it's really important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.